All right.
You are live.
Thank you. We've already called the meeting to order and we've had roll call, and now we are at approval of the agenda. Are there any changes from staff?
Madam Chair, there are no changes from staff.
Thank you. So do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Approved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Elizabeth, will you please call for the vote?
Yes, ma'am. Chair, Councilor Viho Koppler,
Yes?
Kate Kennedy,
Yes.
Ryan Gallagher,
Yes.
John Fines,
Yes.
Ryan Cordova,
Yes.
Megan McGarity,
Yes.
Robert Lurcott,
Yes.
Joanne Coleman, Joanne, I see you, but I can't hear your vote.
Elizabeth, it's Johanna Nelson.
Oh, Johanna Nelson,
Yes, here.
are you voting yes on the agenda?
I am. Yes, approve.
Thank you. Motion approved.
Thank you. Next item would be approval of consent calendar. There is none, so we'll move to item 5, approval of the minutes for March 10th, 2021. Are there any changes from the committee? Okay, seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes for March 10th, 2021. Elizabeth, will you please call for the vote?
Chair Viho Koppler,
Yes?
Kate Kennedy,
Yes.
Ryan Gallagher,
Yes.
John Fines,
Yes.
Ryan Cordova,
Yes.
Megan McGarity,
Yes.
Robert Lurcott,
Yes.
Johanna Nelson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next item, 6, action items consent. There are none. Item 7, action items discussion. There are none. Item 8, presentation. Number A, Midtown Progress Report, RFEI solicitation, next steps. Rich Brown.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the EDAC. I may be having some internet issues. My son is home from school and I keep getting some drag on here, so I might have to turn my video off.
But that doesn't mean you are a drag, right?
No, and it's not out of a drag. No, my son, I think he's doing some games, and so
I'm sure it's serious academic stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I can hear him in the next room, so I hope that I can make it through the first and then have Daniel take over. But I have the slides here, so thank you for the time. So I wanted to start.
There, turn off his video.
We'll go to Q&A, and then from there, Madam Chair, you can kind of.
Rich, you are freezing now.
We'd like to thoughtfully discuss our March 31st City Council presentation.
Rich, I don't know if you can hear me, but you are frozen.
Process with both an action plan and a detailed memo outlining the who.
Mr. Brown, you're cutting out quite a bit.
My video off. Sorry. So I was saying that I put a memo in the packet that you received that discussed the cancellation of the full RFEI process. And since mid-January, we've updates on the progress of our efforts. And as I had mentioned to them, we all recognize that this is a pivotal moment in our plans. The scope of work has dramatically changed and has brought us to a point where we have an opportunity to take control of the incremental zoning, the infrastructure, and planning development. It would also allow us to increase this property's land value and re-engage through future solicitations that are subject to governing body review and approval with master development, master lease, or any tenant project opportunities. What I do want to make clear is that this RFEI cancellation does not mean that the city staff are taking on the role of master developer, nor that we would not have an opportunity to entertain disposition and development proposals for an ultimate master plan, which is what's based on the resolution. This is really about a framework to increase the land value and provide next steps in the disposition and master development process. Lastly, we may not have all the answers to your questions today. This is an iterative process, and we're coming to both the council and you with updates in this iterative process. Our next presentation is set for April 14th to talk about land use and zoning. That'll be at the governing body meeting. And we plan to address the next steps of our action plan as we get more information. So we have a monthly meeting here. And so I will make sure that Daniel and or me will be here to talk about any next steps we have in our progress report. So what's going to follow next is a presentation from Daniel, myself, and Andrea. That'll take you through the elements of my memo and what to expect for next steps. I hope that everyone was able to hear me make it through my preamble there. Yes?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So Daniel, I'm going to share my screen and have you start.
Okay.
Okay.
Hello, everybody at the EDAC meeting. I apologize. My video works.
Dennis, can you give me screen sharing ability?
Yes.
But you don't need to see me anyway. I had a surgery yesterday in my rotator cuff, and I am not up for prime time on a video today. So please excuse my
Yeah.
non-video.
Again, I'm still trying to get the screen to share. It's not happening.
Madam Chair,
James?
Daniel, I hope it's not from too much golfing.
I was going to say basketball just to impress you, but no, I really embarrassingly did something that many people do, which was fall off the ladder, putting up Christmas lights in the front of my front yard tree. So it was like, oh, it was bad. One of the legs fell in a gopher hole.
Okay, I think we got it. All right.
Yeah, there.
Okay, here we go. Thank you so much for your patience. All right, Daniel, I'm gonna run the slides through and keep my video off. I think my kid just got off his screen.
Okay.
Video.
Well, this is a short presentation, but we wanted to make it as impactful and informative as possible. There's I think Rich had said that there's a more detailed technical memo that supports this slide. Rich, want to go to the next, or this presentation, sorry. Want to go to the next slide?
There we go.
So just a quick glance back, as everyone recalls, the master developer withdrew from the city's RFEI solicitation process in January. In February, the city immediately mobilized to coordinate a multidisciplinary interdepartmental approach, meaning that there were directors and staff that were working in various teams dealing with land use, infrastructure, existing buildings, public finance, and just a series of topics. And I was coordinating them with Sam and Burnett, and we would share information back and forth across teams, and when necessary, coordinate them so that they were speaking to each other regularly. What came out of that process in March, which we had promised to get back to City Council, was a series of next steps, Midtown moving forward, and we presented the results of that all those teams' work into a consolidated effort moving forward. So Rich, want to go to the next slide?
Sure. Maybe Andrea can speak to the resolution.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yes, I guess I can turn on my video. I apologize. So the resolution that was adopted in 2018 designated the city manager as the person who would move forward with commencement of the planning stage. There are 3 stages. We've already done the concept stage. We're currently in the planning stage. And this basically gives direction to either do requests for qualification or for proposals to get this framework moving forward in the land development process. And so under this, the RFEI had moved forward. Since that has been canceled, this still gives the authority to start utilizing either RFQs or RFPs to obtain contractors to move this planning stage forward. So that's really what we're highlighting here.
Thanks.
So what are the one of the things that we learned during this process is that, just one step back, I think everyone recognizes that the process we went through, the solicitation process, brought in a developer, much changed over the course of the year, and they withdrew. Their investment strategy for pushing Midtown forward didn't match their objectives, either their development objectives and or their economic objectives. We were hoping to work through a lot of these issues with them, but we also learned through this process is that the city can move forward with or without them. And so what we want to do is we want to work much more locally with the knowledge and experience to position the site to reduce the development risk and the uncertainties and challenges that we identified with the master developer, many of which we knew, but they were highlighted during our negotiation process. We want to position the city to lead and maximize the community development benefits. We know that always community development benefits require negotiation and oftentimes subsidies. We want to be able to lead that so that we can maximize them in collaboration with communities. And finally, we want to position the development so that it can happen in smaller incremental phases. And one of the reasons we want to do that is the following. We want to open up opportunities for stronger participation with local planners, developers, and businesses. Again, we want to open up that opportunity so that we can get much more varied participation in the process. We also want to focus the public engagement process in zoning, land use, and development planning, which is what we're going to be doing next. Mm-hmm. And we want to increase the city capacity by establishing an internal Midtown project manager, which Rich is in the process of doing now. Next slide. But I want to take a step back when we talk about the city being able to position the property to achieve goals. These were goals that were established during that concept planning phase that Andrea just mentioned. We are now in the development planning phase. It's outlined in the resolution. But in the concept planning phase, there were 3 areas of goals that the public arrived at and that was passed through a resolution by the governing body in the Midtown Planning Guidelines. So we have a series of land uses that we want to see there, the development goals around higher education, housing choices for all incomes. We want to expand the film and multimedia industry. We want to expand local community arts and culture at Midtown. And we want to look at technology and innovation at Midtown as a center for that. We know that particular one, things are changing right now and evolving because of the recent economic changes due to COVID. But we think that we want to continue striving for that and working with local entrepreneurs and achieving that. On the public policy side, what the governing body and the administration continues to push as a goal as well is to make sure that we're generating near-term revenues to pay operating costs, meaning everyone knows we have a bond to pay down, and we want some revenue streams to come in early so that we can begin paying operating costs. And we want to try to create long-term value, meaning the higher the land value that we can achieve, the more opportunities we have to achieve economic and community development goals, whether it be housing, affordable housing, increased job creation and training, or whatever the different community development objectives that come out of the public engagement process. And finally, the community wants to see that they're involved in establishing some of these policies and development. So they want it to be inclusive and transparent. As everybody knows, we're working with the UNM Design and Planning Assistance Center. And they want the development to represent something that's remarkably sustainable, equitable, and that has public spaces for programming and public congregation. Next slide. So if we know that there's also this public discussion about just sell it now, or let's figure out how to do the right investment over time so we can continue to make decisions as we move forward. But we know that if we sell it now, that the property has lower value because of all the challenges that we outlined and we've outlined here in this committee in previous discussions. So that reduces the land value. We then have a tougher time in negotiating some of these goals that I just outlined for you. But it's through minimal investments, we can begin increasing our chances. And depending on that level of investment, we can make decisions along the way for what goals become more important over time. And that investment strategy then is commensurate with the type of goals we want to achieve. Next slide. So what are the next steps? We have terminated the RFEI solicitation process. We are going to rezone the property. We are going to create a comprehensive planning framework and infrastructure plan. And we're going to prepare the site for early development. The RFEI outlined a scope of work that is no longer relevant for us, meaning that if we are going to take on these tasks of rezoning, creating a development plan, and preparing the site, these were tasks, scopes of work that we wanted a master developer to do. If we are changing the scope of work, the RFEI is therefore terminated. So why are we doing this? Well, we know that we want to use existing buildings for community purposes, and we know what those are: library, the Performing Arts Center, the Visual Arts Center, Benildes Hall, and Garson Studios. We know that we want to expand Garson Studios into premier studio and film complex. We want to identify early on parcels for affordable and mixed income housing. And we want to proceed with this idea of incremental development phases so that we can solicit developers that don't have to be at the master developer size, but we could at some point in the future if that's what we decided to do. But we'd be in a better negotiation position with that master developer, and/or we can procure project developers who just want to do 1 or 2 sites. But the incremental development strategy allows us to do it incrementally in bite sizes so that people begin to understand and be involved over time as phases unfold for the development of Midtown. Next slide. I think that's it. So this is where we're still putting up information. We put up presentations, the progress reports on the Midtown District SantaFe.com, and the Design and Art Center, Design and Planning Assistance Center also created this Culture Connect site where they are continually uploading everything from videos to just work in progress for the public as part of the public engagement process. So we encourage you to visit those sites as well. And that's the end of the presentation.
Rich,
Daniel.
thank you, Daniel. Rich, do you have a closing comment, or how do you want to proceed?
No, thank you very much, Madam Chair. No, my closing comment just that Daniel took you through sort of where we are, our next steps. I think one of the key takeaways are that I'm in the process of trying to secure a project manager who will be working on the zoning change that needs to happen. That's the biggest issue that we faced, is that we need to rezone the site. So this project manager will take on that role. What we're working through is that they should not directly report to me because I'm kind of the property and project manager for Midtown. And so they need to have an outside role either in public works or directly to the city manager so that they have abilities to make policy suggestions that come before the city council. So I'm working through that. We have budget hearings next week. And so I'm working with finance and the city manager around finding funding for that role. Additionally, we have been selected for $1 million in New Mexico capital outlay, which we'll use in this incremental process. So we have some seed money funding to keep this process going. So that for us is not a burden on the city council and the city coffers. So we will use that money from a standpoint of working to bring forward, and I think Daniel talked about reuse of buildings and getting the infrastructure work done along with the zoning planning work that needs to be done too. So those are 2 key things I wanted to just stress, but I leave it to you to moderate the Q&A that's coming up next.
Thank you. I see a hand from Megan McGarity. Megan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Daniel. I have, excuse me, I'm sorry, 3 questions for you. My first question is about the reuse of existing buildings at Midtown. Since the Higher Education Center was part of Team Midtown, I coordinated a charrette for the Fogelson Library. And in working with that group, we came up with a lot of, great ideas to reuse the building. But there was a general consensus of concern that, getting into the Fogelson and remediating the building to transform it into a 21st century library might turn it into an onion, in that we'd keep discovering new layers and they all make us want to cry. And so there was also some discussion in that charrette that perhaps if we are focused on bringing a truly 21st century library to the Midtown, that the investment dollars may go further, starting with a brand new building, than trying to remediate Fogelson. So my first question really is, the buildings that have been identified to keep, is that a total commitment, or is there still a possibility that they could be further assessed and determined that maybe the commercial value is not where it needs to be?
Yeah, well, I think that's an assessment that still has to happen. And I know that you guys were working together. I was getting updates on those meetings and the outcomes of those from Maria and from Tim Castillo as well. But so once, as we embark on these next tasks for the reuse of existing buildings, Fogelson is a priority. And oftentimes when you're doing these community sort of focused projects, the value of an asset is less than really what it's economically worth in the marketplace. And so those are decisions we'll have to make about whether it gets demolished, right? Which I think people would be really upset if it got demolished, versus how do we rehab this building to be that 21st century learning center. So I think those are decisions that committee has to reconvene. And I have some thoughts about how we reconvene these committees that were working previously on these existing buildings, because we don't want to lose that knowledge and momentum and idea creation that happened. And so I guess all I can say right now is stay tuned. I'm working on a calendar with Rich on how to begin evaluating these existing assets. And when we start pulling these committees together to help us think through it, and who ultimately is responsible for getting it done. So those are some of the things that Rich and I are going to be working on over the next few weeks. But thank you. And yes, we haven't closed anything down. We actually, so I think we'll continue to assess what the right strategy is for Fogelson. But yeah.
Great.
And
If there's,
Madam Chair, I'd like to add
Oh,
something,
I'm sorry.
if I
Go
could.
ahead.
If I could, Megan. So two things. One is that keep in mind that some of these buildings are legacy buildings. And so keeping the legacy of Midtown and our focus on Santa Fe and its history and culture, that these legacy buildings, sort of like the library, may have a stronger chance than the Quonset huts from the reuse issues that come with it, right? So the Quonset huts, even though they could be used in the film industry for workshops, the legacy of the Fogelson Library and its architecture has a greater chance of staying in that way. But one of the discussions we've had recently is that around the country, all kinds of cities our size are facing the same issue, especially now that they're all coming out of pandemic and they have a decimated commercial center. And that there have been cities that have looked at buildings that we'd call ugly ducklings and say, what can we do to reimagine this? Because we're building for the future, not really for the present. And so I think you're right to say in your charrette that we do need to relook at the buildings as we get to this planning stage to say, as we think about these ugly ducklings, some are decommissioned right now, but some are worth some from a standpoint that because these conversations are going on, there might be a new idea that could come up in the next 6 to 12 months that could say, what, if we expand the film industry, maybe the Quonset hut is the editing center, right? Or maybe the library is more than just the library, it's an innovation center. So those conversations are a part of this process we're going through. And then hopefully Daniel is going to put together the calendar, as he mentioned, about when we will discuss coming up with reuse plans that we can discuss here and with the governing body.
So I'll try to be zippy with my next two questions. My next question is, I didn't see anything in the presentation about going for the brownfield designation for the Midtown. Is that still in the mix for strategies?
Madam Chair, Councilor Megan, I'm going to ask Daniel to respond to it, but I could say that we are, as I called it, an iterative process. Brownfield will probably be part of that piece, keeping in mind that we still need to do, I think that's called a phase 2 environmental study to really figure out what the brownfields are. Right now, we know that there's some asbestos in the ground, but we don't really know how large or big this brownfield is. You know, some of the other discussions are around, should we make it a metropolitan redevelopment district? And if we make it that way, we have to go to the council to say, we have to designate it as a blighted area. And also because it's an opportunity zone, that brownfield designation actually adds more attractive capital value to us. But we still have to get to that place where, how do we designate through a phase 2 environmental study to figure out what parts are brownfield or what parts are not. So I guess it's coming.
Great. That was a great answer. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So my last one really quick then is, I was just curious, I was in a discussion yesterday with Dean Wysong, who's the dean of our fine arts department. We were talking specifically about photography with one of our photography instructors. And he was like, oh yeah, there's amazing, like untouched camera equipment on the Midtown and it's just sitting there and nobody's using it. So I was just wondering if there is, you know, something that we can fold into the planning mix about assessing assets that are existing in some of these buildings and maybe figuring out how we can either partner with educational institutions to give them to students for learning opportunities or sell them or do something. Because yeah, just even in the Fogelson, you know, there are assets just kind of lying around. I think the public library has done a great job in protecting the library assets there, but there are also all kinds of, you know, artwork and things like that that we could really use to promote our town and the transformation that are part of that history of the Midtown itself from the colleges. So I was just curious about that, if there was a way to leverage some of the assets that are sitting there in some of those closed buildings and turn those either into funding or opportunities for education.
Madam Chair, Member McGarity, so currently the Arts and Culture Department is working with the Cabinet Secretary of Arts and Culture. And so they're doing an assessment, all of our, what I call art assets. And the photography equipment is actually like on level 2 of the assets. We have a lot of paintings and books and manuscripts. That's sort of the first phase. What to do? Do we send it to a museum? Do we put it on loan? And so they're getting to that piece. And so Sam Burnett, who's not on here, he's our property manager. He's coordinating that with Pauline Kamiana from our Arts and Culture Department. So we do recognize, again, that reuse piece is that nothing should go to be mold, right? We need to figure out how to make sure it's being used for schools, et cetera. And so Pauline is working with the Arts Commission and the Arts and Public Places and with Sam to figure out what we can do with those art and creative assets that we have.
Great. Well, thank you, Rich. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for the questions. Good.
All right, next is Johanna Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Daniel, for the presentation. My question is in regard to the federal funding that's coming down through the American Rescue ARPA Plan Program Act, as well as the big infrastructure package that's coming down too. A lot of that money is focused on developing out innovation centers, focused on manufacturing. And so in regard to the timeline of this project, do you think that it'll be in a position to utilize some of the funding, maybe specifically through EDA or within this calendar year?
Madam Chair, Member Nelson, thank you for that question. Yes, I call it raining down money, and you're correct. It is going to be raining down, and then it's over a 2-year period where you can disperse this money. So we are trying to get our ducks in the row with our infrastructure zoning, so that before we put the money in place, we know kind of what the usage are. And so it's helpful for us because it can be a part of a capital stack, which just means we can add money on top of other money to do the things we want to do. We don't have a plan yet, and that's mainly because people are still trying to get guidance out of what that ARP grant and the infrastructure plan is going to be. So we don't have a specific plan, but we recognize, again, because it's in an opportunity zone, you can pile money on top of it, but you got to have a good plan to make sure that that we can bring it to the city council and the public to see where the money is going. Ultimately, I'd love to have it pay off the bond, but it will be used for roads, access, infrastructure, upgrading our film production possibly, and again, for some of the reuse items and reuse of the buildings that are there. So that's kind of the preliminary response I can give you as it relates to the federal grant.
Johanna, do you have any other questions?
I don't, Madam Chair. Thank you. And thank you, Rich, for the response.
Okay, Ryan Cordova.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In Daniel's presentation, he talked about rezoning. What's the timeline that you have in regard? I mean, I know you're creating a calendar, but to rezone that area, what are you looking at as far as a timeline? Because I think that would have, that would kind of set the course for everything else. I mean, you certainly wouldn't want to sell assets before you even rezone it, knowing that you may potentially use it for maybe a film studio or something like that in the future. What kind of timeline are we looking at, Daniel?
So in the calendar that I've drafted, that I'm still working through with Rich's team, I'm looking at around anywhere from 14 to 18 months. Excuse me. But we want to have it. We want to have the zoning in place as an application by the end of the year or January. Sorry, but what we didn't want to do, or our strategy is, and input's great, but the strategy right now is that we don't want to wait till the zoning is completely in place in order to start bringing in partners to develop. Because then if we wait, say it's 18 months, we wait to that 18-month, then we send out a solicitation, it's going to take another 18 months, to 2 years to get in the ground. So we thought that we could bring in, we could issue solicitations once we have a fairly good grounding of the strategy that we're going to be moving forward with. And in any solicitation, we would put that, the city's in the process of rezoning the property, so that the respondents know, the level of risk they'd be entering into, and would manage their pre-development tasks and, investment accordingly. But we figured that if we bring them in, there's also an opportunity for them to participate with us to kind of guide these, especially these first initial phases of what sites, et cetera. So there was value in that as well. And since they'll be small and incremental phases, there'd be smaller developers that are a little bit more nimble than moving a master developer forward. So anyway, there's a little bit of strategy thinking going into that process. But
so it's fair to say that you may be doing it concurrently.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for saying that in one sentence.
No, that's okay. I have one more question, if I can, Madam Chair.
Sure.
So my question is, how are you going to differentiate between the economic need of the city? Like, for instance, we sit on the Economic Advisory Council, right? So in the fact that it's going to drive the economy in the city of Santa Fe rather than another building that may take on loss or anything like that, how are we going to evaluate that?
Evaluate the investment first?
Well, any potential, businesses that we're going to team with or whatever, as far as the usage of the building itself and the land itself, is driving the economy a part of the decision making, or is it just simply land usage? Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Daniel, can I start that one?
Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
So that's a really good question, Member Cordova. So Daniel had a slide up that talked about the policy goals and the community goals and the guidelines. So that's kind of our guidance around how we're going to work. And so while we want to have economic impact on what we bring to the table, that's kind of where, ultimately a master developer comes in. We also know that right now the commercial office space market's a little soft. So we might say, look, we're going to start first with housing, because that's a community goal, right? So we could say our economic impact is that if we bring more housing in, we can address some of the issues with Meow expanding or Lanel expanding or other these companies expanding or just people who are transitioning from coming back from college but want to live in Santa Fe. This would be a great way to sort of look at that from an economic impact standpoint. So we will address the different pieces from an economic standpoint. Just earlier, Megan McGarity had mentioned about using the library. And so the library could be just a community benefit, but we could also expand it and say, maybe we can have a small accelerator or business accelerator or incubator there so that we can provide some economic benefits to it. So we have to sort of juggle all of the community guidelines and the needs of our public policy, et cetera. But we will have our eye on the economic benefit. One, because we have a bond to pay, and two, that ultimately we're trying to increase the land value of the parcel.
Thank you for your answer. I think the housing answer is a great answer.
Yeah, we do too.
Ryan, do you have any more questions?
Oh, ma'am, thank you.
All right, John Fines.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Brown and Mr. Hernandez, for the memo. I know you had to do it for City Council last week, and I watched that, but nonetheless, it certainly feels like we're in the right direction by having monthly discussions on this matter in this committee. I'll start by saying that I don't think we were in the right direction last week by having a decision given to council when they were informed that they were going to be given some options to discuss. I continue to feel, and I don't know anybody who feels differently, that the way that the La Hacienda selection was foisted on council and the community about a year ago was about as untransparent and unhelpful a process as we've ever seen. It's the kind of thing you see done at really high levels of government when people have all the power and intend to steamroll, and that's how it felt. And then of course that decision collapsed. And there's some blame and excuses going around, and some of them hold more water than others, but it collapsed. And it collapsed to the point where we're now going in a different direction. So it wasn't like we even, well, so we talked about transparency, and the very first thing that happens, and I'm not saying that your decision is wrong, but the very first thing that happened is several members of council felt steamrolled, and my counselor felt steamrolled, and as her constituent, that certainly translates down to me. Yeah, the city attorney was brought on and said, oh, this is legal. But I mean, imagine, if it was private enterprise and you told the board of directors, I'm going to give you, and it's a big project and it's delayed and it's problematic and it's like the project of a generation. And you tell the board, I'll come to you next month with some choices. And then you make an executive decision without consulting the board. Well, that's legal, but think about how that meeting would go. That's a potentially existential job moment for a CEO who does that. So it may not be perfect apples to apples comparison, but I'd like to see not the lawyer brought out to tell the counselors, oh, this is legal. I'd like to see everything be really at a higher level than that, whenever and if ever possible. I think that there's a lot of lack of trust in Midtown, and there's a lot of lack of trust in general in Santa Fe government. And there's also a lot of lack of confidence in Santa Fe government. If you look at project after project after project and example after example, we're in a raw moment here. And so I think, unfortunately, right or wrong, I think, Mr. Brown, you're capable and you're doing your job, but this is bigger than the Economic Development Department. And I think we, all have to fight at all times to deal with the trust and confidence issue. So that's the end of that lecture. I'm going to continue to keep asking for that. As I said, this has been through council, and I watched all that. And I'm just going to point out that I thought that Councilor Lindell, among many other councilors, but particularly Councilor Lindell, from where I'm sitting, hit the nail on the head. Do we have the bandwidth? Now this is all coming into staff, and we've had this reorg, which stretched out your hours, Mr. Brown, and the reorg, I don't see any signs that it's created any new efficiencies or anything of the sort. And regardless of that, now all this staff is in this memo. And just as Councilor Lindell said, these are people who work hard, who have full plates. who are under a lot of demand, to keep our community running, can we really do this? I think that's a very legitimate question. We've had struggles with a lot of smaller things than this in recent years. And now we're putting all of this on staff and hiring one project manager. I think, Councilor Villarreal was wise to bring that up, and now it's going forward. But, that's one body. I think this is a huge, giant project, and I don't question the loyalty and the work of the staff people who are cited in this memo. I just wonder what the reality is there. And Councilor Lindell spared you her money speech, but we all know her money speech, and her money speech is right on. It's a reality. And I unfortunately find myself in the position of actually starting to see what people were talking about a couple months ago about selling it, when I came before the committee and said, we need to stop that argument in its tracks right now. I'm not advocating it, but I now see where they're coming from. This is tough. And so, you can make a memo and make a plan and, and everything looks good. And then there's the reality of what the bandwidth is of city government, especially now that we have those clocks that make everybody quit at 5 o'clock, or most people. In my day, we just worked around the clock and it wasn't illegal. At least some of us did. So what I'm going to close with is, I like that chart that Mr. Hernandez presented again today that shows that if we invest in ourselves, that the value goes up in 12 to 18 months and then more so in 5 years. But what I need to see is the data. I need to see the ROI. How much do we need to invest for how much increased value? And I need to see all the scheduling. And I know that it's coming at the end of April. Your mission today wasn't to give us a full document. But if I put a memo like this in front of the tougher bosses I've had who made me what I am, they would have thrown it back in my face and said, I don't want to see anything until you show me deadlines, statistics, deliverables, report, all of that. And so I'm not going to make a whole lot more comments until I see your next iteration. But the one thing I want to ask about that iteration, in addition to the ROI figures, what do we need to spend to get to what kind of value, to the degree that you can predict such a thing? Understandably, there's going to be some leeway in there, but I need to see that. But I also think you need to take the time to map out staff hours. What hours are staff going to have to put into what? Like in public engagement, you've got Ms. Ladd and housing, and then, a contractor on culture. There's a wide, massive gap in that public engagement piece. And so how many hours does Ms. Ladd have to put into that? And right down the line, what are the, and realistic hours? Because we all know that projects and realities come along that steal our time, things that we can't foresee. And so don't put an aspirational amount of hours in there, make it practical, err on the side of where it could go. If the community decides to have a really big hoedown on housing and Ms. Ladd ends up running all these public engagement housing meetings night after night, week after week, try to have a sense of what those hours are going to be. So I would encourage you to really give us a really fleshed out document next time around, so that Councilor Lindell doesn't just give her money speech, but we can start to break the numbers down and make some more informed decisions. So good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.
Do I have any more committee members who want to make any comments? Okay, well, Ms. Robert, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My concern in the project as it has proceeded on is on two tracks. One is that my belief has been that there needs to be a development plan in place, flexible, yes, but in place to lay out armature, if you will, access and basic circulation, public open space, if that is a clear requirement and goal, those kinds of things, which then can lay out what development parcels would look like. And the other is the public engagement portion. And the public engagement portion, it seems to me there's a real disconnect from the early session where the sort of a big splashy community workshop day with a lot of participation. It seems to have boiled down to that list on Rich's chart on the left side. I think it was basically land uses that people indicated an interest in. Affordable housing, high tech, arts and culture. And then after that, it was frankly secretive, you know. And I understand that there is a process now to set up an engagement process using UNM's help, which is good, but there's a disconnect there. And it seems to me that there's got to be the connections with what the community first said it was interested in and how you're going to proceed with that. So I'd be interested in seeing what that process is going to look like as soon as we can, maybe next time. But in terms of the plan, there is a statement in there that calls for a development, something in a infrastructure plan. I don't know what that means, but I'm interested in what it will be and how it will be carried out. It seems to me that if it is, it should be in tandem with the zoning and how those two things fit together. But I think it needs to be a structured, physical kind of document that gives guidance to people who are interested in doing development, even more so now if you are anticipating that you may have multiple developers that the city will deal with. So that you have this sort of general guidance of what pieces of land are available, what they look like, how they will get access and the like. So I'm curious about what that document or that infrastructure plan development guidance thing will look like. I guess that's a question.
Okay. Yes. So you've hit the nail on the head. The zoning land use plan ordinance has to go hand in hand with the development framework plan. And I use the term framework to sort of build on what we talked about. But it allows for flexibility into the future. What it does do is it begins to parcelize the site so that people understand the block sizes and parcels within those blocks, but even some flexibility in that. So, the infrastructure overlay into that is that it really informs that development plan. We want to build off of infrastructure that is existing, and then kind of build out what we think are the main lines for infrastructure to go through the site, off of which developers can connect. Because right now, not all the utilities are available throughout the site. So the infrastructure plan will be superimposed on that development plan, which will, outline how those parcels and block patterns are laid and where the main streets will probably go, because that's where the main lines will be.
I assume that will include some way to address what I thought was a fairly strong commentary by the community of having public open space as part of the plan, accessible from the surrounding communities.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
That will be a main element, actually, of that development framework plan, and it's actually what we are presenting at the April 14th City Council meeting. Not the plan, but the way that we're planning on approaching it, this development framework, so it gives people an idea about what is that. So we're going to give them some precedent examples.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Are there any other comments anybody wishes to make? All right, I just have some closing comments. Obviously, this is a project in flux, and it is ongoing it's going to be ongoing for quite a while. As Rich mentioned, the next meeting that this will be discussed will be April 14th, and I certainly encourage everybody on this committee to pay close attention to what is going on. A lot of what is happening with this project is is within this committee's responsibility. It's within your interests as far as being on the committee. So I think the more knowledgeable you all are, the better that we can give input into city staff and to city councilors about what it is that the group wants to see. I will say that when we were in the council meeting, there was a concern about budget and costs. And I'm hoping that that will be formulated and we'd get some more answers on this route that's been chosen. I think it's important to know what all it's going to cost. And I think John Fines, you mentioned that. So that's going to be something to watch. There was some disappointment among some counselors in the meeting expressed about not being involved in the decision about where we would go from here, and that it was a staff-driven decision without council input, when many of us thought that that is something that should have been a council decision. I think that maybe the city council is going to be paying even more close attention as we move forward, although we were paying close attention and relying on what was being told to us in the past about this. But I will say that in my case, I know I've had various constituents reach out who were disappointed, but still, I think overall, some of the comments I've received are that they still hold the city council accountable. And as policymakers, we are accountable. And so, I maybe we need to be a little bit more forceful if we're not being heard. So I don't know where this is going, but it is important to know that we all need to pay attention to what's happening. They have also expressed a concern for the capability, not in terms of know-how and sincerity in wanting to get this project to be a success, but whether we have the staff capability to proceed. And as mentioned earlier, one project manager may not be what's going to make this happen, because that doesn't seem to be enough. I would say person power at this point. I agree, we need some kind of development plan, and I'm hoping that we would get there. I have a question about when we go through this rezoning and such. I know and I'm wondering how the Midtown Link relates to this, and will all of these various zoning requests go through the Planning Commission? Or Rich, how do you see this working?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm gonna put one part, and then I'll ask Daniel to sort of expand upon it. And maybe Andrea might be able to add something from a legal standpoint because of the link and the overlay, because right now we're a residential zone. And in order to take advantage of the link overlay, you have to get to a C2 zone. So that's why it's important for us to jump into the zone repurposing of that standpoint. So I think Daniel is sort of leading the charge on the sort of incremental planning and development. So Daniel, if you want to talk about zoning and what you're doing with Opticos, et cetera, and then Andrea, if you want to speak to the link and what it can do, or the overlay, and that we're also thinking about other ways to look at the district from a metropolitan district or TIF district as it relates to the link too. So Daniel, if you want to add anything to what I've just said. Oh, he's gone silent.
Here it comes. Okay, sorry, I was on mute. Just quickly, this will also be outlined at the April 14th City Council meeting. But yes, we'll go through we'll go through all the the regulatory requirements, the jurisdictional process for zoning approvals, ordinance amendments for the link overlay, and the development plan. So all of that will go through the through the usual approval process the city requires. But Andrea.
Madam Chair, so there are questions about design, master plan, and zoning. And so first off, you have to rezone in order to get to the master plan or the design plan. And so the first thing we need to tackle is the zoning. The reason behind that, as Rich has talked about, is that it's either R1 or R5, which really isn't a development zoning. So in order to get into that link overlay, you have to rezone the property in full so that the overlay can be used. The overlay grants different things, such as there are benefits of height. The restrictions are a little higher, not higher, I'm sorry, you're allowed to go higher, so the restrictions are less in the overlay. There are also differentiations with the boundary of like where you can build versus the street boundaries. There are certain things like that that you can utilize. So in order to start moving forward and mapping that out, the first task is to rezone. And so I think that is why Opticos, Daniel, who's our project manager, potentially having an internal or a contract project manager to move that forward would be the best way to do this, because in order to get rezoning, you have to go through planning commission and you have to go through all those approval process. If we have an internal planner doing that, their role is a little bit confused, meaning they're presenting what also they normally would be evaluating. And so the brainstorming power is, it might be an internal person, it might be a contract person, but to utilize that person to move forward with the entitlements that's not in the land use team currently. So those are the discussion points that we've been talking about.
Okay. So I think, that's another thing that I believe this committee needs to be watching as we move forward into the future. So again, the next council meeting to discuss this is April 14th. And I'm assuming, Rich, that there will be future council meetings, because this isn't probably the last of it. So, but that's the next one, the next big one, where hopefully the council will get more answers to what's going to happen. Okay, I see Ryan Cordova's hand up. Ryan?
Madam Chair, thank you. I have one question for Ms. Salazar. You just talked about the person that you'd have as a point person in regards to like a project manager. Would that person then request the approval of the city council then, or take to the city council any of their recommendations, looking for approval?
Madam Chair, Commission Member Cordova. So I don't know the exact process. I'm not the city's land use attorney, and that is Sally Paez, and she could probably explain that exact process. But the idea is that the person who would be the project manager moving forward the entitlement process would go through all of those meetings, meaning planning commission, neighborhood notification meetings, and through city council. And if there are, appeals or whatever, that person would be the point person to move that forward.
Thank you.
Ryan, we'll outline that at the April 14th to have an answer probably on a slide about all the approvals that are required.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Well, I think it's sort of like depending, I think the zoning is probably more generic, it sounds like, but when you get into the real development, like what exactly is going to happen there may be other land use decisions that have to be made. And it would seem to me that those decision points would go to council before moving forward, requesting any type of land use matters, because if we are not liking what's being proposed, then that's probably where it needs to start or stop. And that's what happens, I think, in some of these things, is that the staff moves forward without a real concurrence from the policymakers. So that's what I mean about, the city council maybe being more up to speed and asking for things to come before the council before things get way, down the road. So again, we look forward to what is going to be presented on April 14th. And then assuming the next meeting after that for the council is April 28th, then there could be maybe more discussions there. I'm not sure. But one thing for sure for this committee is just to keep your eyes open on what's happening on the agendas. And, it makes our committee meetings, I think, more effective when we can speak from issues and let staff know what it is this committee is thinking and what we want to see in the future. And so I think that's a healthy way to handle it. The next item I'll conclude this. I don't see any other hands raised. All right, thank you, Rich, and thank you, Daniel and Andrea.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I just want to add something. We will come back to the EDAC committee following the 14th and or 28th meeting to have another update. Based upon our last conversations, we said we will keep this as an ongoing discussion here because it's a part of economic development. So you will be informed as a EDAC committee about the progress, whether it's reviewing what we've discussed at the council or getting copies of the progress reports, et cetera. So that will be a part of the process for economic development, and it's going to be ongoing. It's not going to be just a 2-week or 1-month series. You will see my funny face and possibly my kid overloading the internet on a monthly basis. So.
All right, thank you for that, Rich. Robert, I see your hand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering what's the likely date of our next meeting?
Well, I was going to, we usually meet on the first city council day of the month, which looks like May, well, is this right? May 12th?
The second, yeah.
That would be our first city council meeting of the month. And Rich, can you confirm that? Is that a council day? I don't have the calendar in front of me.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the calendar now. Give me 1 second.
That's what's on the agenda, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
12th, yeah.
And now this meeting was a little bit off schedule because we do usually have it at the beginning, which would have been April 14th. But I think this is good. Thank you all for making time to be here. So that would be the next meeting, Robert. Do you have any other questions?
Well, then, in other words, it would be after the 2 meetings that are being talked about with council by quite a bit, I guess, and even the next, right at the same time as the next meeting. Okay, thanks. That'll do it.
All right. If there's something that comes up that we need to schedule a special meeting, Janice and I can speak and we can figure out if that should be done. Okay. John, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Have we moved into a general question area or are we still in the Midtown?
We're still in Midtown, but do you have a question related to Midtown?
Sort of, because Mr. Brown mentioned the rainfall, I think he called it, and that does apply to Midtown. But I'm just curious if you have an assessment, Mr. Brown, of what is available and what is out there, state and federal, and how well our business community is understanding how to become informed and to take action on that. And I know there's going to be unknown unknowns in there, to quote an unfortunate person from the past. But I'm sure you see what I'm driving at. And is there anything we need to do? Should there be PSAs, other communications? Are people struggling to deal with forms? It would be such a shame to miss this kind of largesse and to let something like Midtown occlude shepherding businesses into that money.
Madam Chair, Member Fines, there's a couple things, and they are unknown unknowns. Some known unknowns I have is that we do know that the city is going to be the recipient of $15 million. We don't know how that money will be sort of broken into categories. Economic development will get a part of that. A large portion of the money, if it comes to economic development, will probably be used to provide relief to the small businesses that did not have the opportunity to get a grant from the CARES Act. We only had like a 2-month window to provide grants for business relief. So we have about 230 businesses that did not receive CARES Act grant money. So some of that money will go to small businesses who are still struggling to survive. So that's one portion. From a Midtown standpoint, it'll probably come from the tranche that comes through the infrastructure piece. And as you know, that's winding its way through the federal government. And I don't know how that's going to work, even though the parliamentarian did a grant that they can do budget reconciliation. So they can do it on a majority vote. So once that happens, we will still wait from guidance from Treasury, which will then come down to the state, which will mainly come down to the city. There also is a debate whether or not any new money will come through the state through economic development, where Member Nelson is, as to whether or not they will be in charge of dispersing any monies to our business community. As you know, we had a grant that we worked with the county on, and then the Department of Finance also had grant money that they used themselves, and they had their own technology that was much easier to apply and receive money for. So we don't know what is going to happen from there, but that's kind of the timeline. That we hope that once we get the ARP money and figure out what the guidelines are there, it'll probably be a big, large portion that goes to small businesses. But when the infrastructure piece comes, which I'm thinking will probably be around June, that's when we will hopefully get some idea around what we can use for Midtown, for infrastructure, broadband, et cetera.
So for instance, the restaurant piece of the 1.9 trillion act that passed, that doesn't come through the city. That doesn't get apportioned by the city. Is that directly from the federal government to an individual restaurant? And are our people taking advantage of that?
Because it has not come to us for the restaurant relief yet. I know that Randy Randall, who's on my tourism team, is working with the State Restaurant Association, but money has not been put into a pot to be dispersed, to my knowledge. So maybe Member Nelson might know what's happening with that from the governor's office or from the cabinet secretary's office.
Go ahead, Johanna.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rich. We haven't received any word yet. Your assessment is right on, Rich, so far. And that's federal money coming down, not necessarily to the individual local governments.
Right. Yeah. So, Madam Chair, Member Fines, there's a big debate whether a lot of this federal money will filter through the state before it gets to us. And so we're all kind of waiting on pins and needles to figure out, is this a direct payment? I read something recently in the Wall Street Journal that the president said it's really going to come to directly to the municipalities, that first tranche from ARP, but that has not been confirmed through Treasury guidelines, which that's the first place it has to go before it gets anywhere near any of us.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Is that what is, are you done, John? Any more
Yes.
questions?
No, that's
Okay.
exactly the area I just wanted to probe a little and see how we're doing.
Okay, thank you. So we will close that agenda item and we're on to public comment. So Janice or Rich, did you get any public comments by email or otherwise?
Madam Chair, there are no comments from the public.
Okay.
Oh, and Madam Chair, just for the record, Victoria Murphy did join our meeting.
Yes. Hi, Victoria. Thank you for that. So the next are matters from staff. Rich?
Madam Chair, thank you. I do have a couple of small updates. I want to first thank Janice. This is her inaugural project management for our EDAC committee, as she's now our new liaison. So I want to say thank you, Janice, to coordinating all the details. We have a good turnout today. So just want to say thank you, and also to Ms. Martin for being our scribe. It's a really boon to us that she's here. So just want to say thank you to that. I also want to say goodbye to a staff member, Lauren Lucero. She is leaving us. She has a new opportunity at Los Alamos. And so this is her last day today. Actually, she's leaving us officially on Friday, but this is her last day with our group. So I want to say thank you publicly for all the work that she's done. And if you do not know, Lauren has done so much for us as we struggled through this pandemic last year. Amazing amount, just mask, food, couriering, getting things done, putting out yard signs, helping with public Wi-Fi. It's just an amazing amount of work that she's done to keep us safe and healthy and to be informed. And so I just want to acknowledge all the work that she's done on behalf of the city and our residents. So thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren.
Mhm.
Good luck to
Yeah. And lastly, I just want to let the committee know that hopefully next month, I think our meeting is May 12th, we are working on a couple of LEDA grants, business expansion grants. And so we want to bring them to you. It's a part of our ordinance and responsibility to bring them to the EDAC first. So I'm hoping that we have enough in the queue that we can start the conversations. As you know, Fabian had announced his retirement, but he actually didn't retire. He's actually working behind the scenes on getting these LEDA grant expansions put together. So I'm hoping that if we don't get them in May, we'll definitely have them in June, but we have some very exciting business expansions that are coming up, and they will come to you, this committee first for review. And so there is signs of life in the city of Santa Fe, and that's exciting from my standpoint and from the economic development standpoint. So I just wanted to share that with you on top of all the work we're going to be doing with Midtown.
Thank you, Rich. Are there any comments from any other members of staff that are here? Okay. All right. Next, item 11, matters from the committee. Do we have any committee members that want to? Oh, Kate, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to see if Rich Brown or Counselor, if you could give us an update on the new business licenses. The new business license process is a mild disaster, and we've been receiving a lot of feedback on the Chamber of Commerce Board as well regarding how difficult it has been to renew your business license as well as get a first-time business license. My understanding is that the department only has one, maybe two people in it at this time, and it is taking an extensively long period of time for people to get their licenses renewed because nobody knows that you have to link an old account to a new account, and then there is actually a manual process behind the scenes where staff then has to connect them and reconnect with the client. You then apply, and then they have to manually review your license, and then you get an email with a printout PDF. We've been receiving a lot of feedback at the Chamber of Commerce from members basically talking about that they're unlicensed because they don't know how to do it or have been unable to do it. And I just wanted to bring that to the attention of the committee and see if we could get a little bit of an update, and maybe if we could add that item to our agenda next time as well to continue to get updates on the business license process.
Thank you, Kate. We did talk about this, I think, either last meeting or the meeting before, but Rich, do you have any updates?
Yeah, I do have a couple of updates, and I have been chatting with Member Kennedy. Two things as an update. One is that we do have two staff. I'm just about to bring on two temporary staff, and then I'm going in front of the City Council next week for budget hearings, and I've asked for an additional staff, full-time staff, to come on board. So we'll have 3 full-time people, and 2 of the temps that I'm hoping to bring on, I'm going to cross my fingers, next week, were temps that we used last year. So they understand the process. And I on behalf of the city staff, apologize for just this crazy integration of technology and the 1980s way we used to do it. And so it is a little bit of a struggle, but we're hoping to make it through. There was a resolution that was passed last year that allowed license holders to renew based upon their issue date versus waiting for March 31st to pile it all in. And so we need to build a little bit more public awareness of that. But the customer service end is what we're struggling with right now. And that's why I'm trying to bring the 2 temps on. And then I'm hoping that I'm successful bringing that 3rd person onto the team. And it's been kind of crazy because of pandemic. We closed the license office. You can't go inside the office. A lot of people like to come to City Hall to renew. So people have been working from home, working from the office. And so it's been a struggle. And I'll say that first, I apologize for any undue cause or harm that's done to some of these businesses, but we're trying to rectify it.
Thank you. I appreciate the update. It's been difficult also because license renewals through the state are on a different process as well as insurance renewals. So we've had a lot of just different timelines and deadlines, and some businesses are going unlicensed in one way, or something's pending in another, and they can't get insurance coverage, or they can't renew a lease. And there's just been a lot of miscommunication, I think, and I really appreciate Rich's effort in clarifying this matter and keeping us up to date. It's super helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Rich, one of the things that was brought up before was that it doesn't work for Mac users who have Safari as a browser. And
it doesn't work for Firefox either. It only works on Google Chrome.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of different types of users that aren't PC users. So if you can do anything about that, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm not the tech guy, but I know that they have a system called Intergov, and I'm also struggling to figure out why in these times you don't have a software application that doesn't work across different platforms or iOS or operating systems. But I did ask that question of the IT folks. They're the ones that have to really answer that question, and I don't have an answer yet, but I'm hoping to when I come back in May. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So any other matters from the committee? Okay, I'll move on to matters from the chair. I don't have anything to report except that we'll go back onto our normal meeting schedule, which is the first council meeting of the month, which the next one would be May 12th. But if there's anything that's important or urgent to convene this committee before then I will work with Rich and Janice to make that happen. Okay.
Madam Chair, may I add?
Yes.
The meeting, just for clarification, is 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock, not 2 o'clock. So that was put on the Zoom invite. So I will have that changed. So typically our meetings just go to 1 at the latest.
Right. And believe me, I would not stretch it out on purpose. Thank you. All right. Then the next meeting is May 12th. Oh, Kate, did you have your hand up?
I just had a question quickly about the new legislation that was passed regarding the alcohol licenses. I had mentioned to Rich Brown also just sort of how we're going to handle that regarding special event permitting. Special event permitting had come before this committee for a number of years, as well as the impact of alcohol sales and this kind of specific bill on economic development in general with the city, especially because all license holders have to have a city alcohol license in addition to their state alcohol license. And there's different regulations at the city, county, and state level regarding service, permitting, property area, events, et cetera. And I was just wondering if there's anybody we could bring on to talk to us about how this new legislation is going to impact city regulations and what the city's plan is for enforcement, special events, service, permitting, all the things that we had worked so hard on to streamline previously.
Okay, thank you for that. So Rich, I think we can talk about our next agenda and see if there's anything that we can report on this for the next meeting. All right.
Yeah, there's a group of folks who need to come together with this legislation. I think one, really understand the legislation, and then two, figure out how we interpret it, because we're trying to launch the festivals and markets also, and there'll be alcohol nearby there, and so tourism, land use, and the clerk's office actually are combined together with the business licensing office as it relates to this. So there are a lot of moving parts that need to come together. So I will try to put something together for them, with them, to maybe come back on the 12th to update.
That would be super helpful. We had previously heard from the tourism department that they weren't sure if the convention center was going to reopen this year, and they are, and there's events as soon as this weekend.
Yep.
And there are people who are actively looking for catering and bar service and all the vendors and services that come with being able to put on events there. And I think people were a little caught off guard when they had been told initially the convention center wasn't going to be open. We weren't really notified that it was. And now all of a sudden, people on the vendor list are getting calls for services, and we're like, whoa. And there's some people who have questions about who can provide alcohol services and who's responsible and liability and all that stuff. I think it came knocking on our door a little faster than we were expecting.
Yes, right, for everybody, yes.
Okay, thank you, Kate. All right, before we sign off, I'm sure the committee joins me in wishing Lauren Lucero all the best in your new endeavor, and thank you for the service that you gave to this committee. We appreciate it, and to economic development. We wish you all the best. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you so much.
Yes, big round of applause. All right, next meeting is May 12th, and we are adjourned. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.